Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever feel like you are cramming for a test, but not really understanding the big picture? Well, this new study dives right into that. So, we all know that feeling right before a big exam. So many of us turn to self-testing or quizzing ourselves. The idea is that by pulling information out of your brain again and again, you make those memories stronger, and a ton of research backs this up. When you test yourself, you remember facts better. But here is where things get interesting. This research asks a pretty big question. Does just remembering facts mean you truly understand them? Or is there more to it? Think about it. If you can perfectly recall all the facts about, say, photosynthesis, does that automatically mean you understand how it works and why it is important? The researchers here noticed that psychology has two main ways of looking at learning. One is all about memory and retrieval, like the self-testing we just talked about. The other is about understanding how ideas connect, which they call inference-based integration. This means actively figuring out how different pieces of information fit together. They wanted to see which approach really leads to deeper understanding. To figure this out, they designed a study. They had people learn from some educational texts. Then they compared 3 different ways of learning: self-testing, like quizzing yourself with flashcards; self-explaining, where you try to explain the material in your own words; and just plain reading. They then tested everyone not just on what facts they remembered, but also on their ability to make inferences. An inference in this case means connecting 2 pieces of information that weren't directly stated together to figure something out. Okay, let's dive into what they found. In their first experiment with over 250 people, they saw what we expected. People who used self-testing remembered the individual facts better. Makes sense, right? You are practicing retrieving those exact facts. But, and this is a big but, the people who used self-testing were worse at making those connections, those inferences, compared to people who used self-explanation. Now, they ran a second experiment to be sure, this time with a longer delay between learning and testing, over a day. And guess what? They got similar results. Self-testing still made people better at remembering facts, but it didn't help them connect those facts into a coherent understanding. It was like they built a great pile of bricks, but didn't put them together into a house. They also looked at what people were actually doing when they self-explained. They found that the people who actually made inferences in their explanations were the ones who did better on the inference test questions later on. On the flip side, people who just noted down the facts in their explanations did better on the fact recall tests. This is super important. It strongly suggests that these learning strategies don't just change how much you know, but how you know it. Self-testing builds knowledge of isolated details, while self-explanation builds connected understanding. An interesting side note, they also found that people had a harder time making inferences when they were learning about science topics compared to stories or historical events. This suggests that the type of material you are learning can also affect how well you can connect ideas. Science texts can sometimes be tricky to integrate. So, what is the big takeaway? Self-testing is great for memorizing facts, no doubt about it. But if your goal is to truly understand something, to be able to connect ideas and apply them in new ways, self-testing alone just doesn't cut it. It is like having all the ingredients but not knowing how to cook a meal. They argue that real understanding comes from actively building connections, from making inferences and weaving those pieces of information together. This happens during the learning phase, when you are trying to make sense of the material. Self-explanation, where you have to put ideas into your own words, seems to encourage this crucial assembly process. Let's look a little more at how they actually did this. In experiment 1, people were given information from folktales, history, and science texts. For some of the material, they did the self-testing. This meant they answered multiple choice questions based on the text. And if they got it wrong, they were shown the right answer. They didn't see the original text itself during this part. For other material, they got to read the text, and then, after each paragraph, they had to type out an explanation in their own words. So, in the self-testing part, it was very focused on getting the right answer for each specific question. They had to mark the correct answer to move forward. This was designed to really hammer home those individual facts. On the other hand, in the self-explaining condition, they had the text in front of them. They had to actively process it, think about it, and then explain it. This forces you to go beyond just recognizing the information to actually trying to understand its meaning and how it relates to other parts. When they tested everyone right after, the self-testing group was definitely better at recalling the specific facts. That was directly tested. But when it came to the inference questions, the ones that tested their ability to connect the dots, the self-explaining group did significantly better. This is the core of their argument. Even though the self-testing group had better memory for the facts, they weren't as good at using those facts to understand the bigger picture. Experiment 2 reinforced this. They even added a control group that just read the material. And interestingly, in this experiment, self-testing didn't even perform better than just reading when it came to making inferences. This suggests that if your goal is comprehension, self-testing might not be much better than doing nothing at all if there is no initial deep processing. The researchers' analysis of people's explanations was really insightful. They found a clear pattern. If people mentioned actual inferences in their explanations, they did well on the inference questions later. If they just noted the facts, they did well on the fact recall questions. This separation really highlights that these strategies build different kinds of knowledge in our minds. Self-testing builds isolated pieces, while self-explanation builds connected networks. Imagine your brain as a network. Self-testing might be like creating a bunch of individual dots, each clearly marked. You can find a dot easily, but they're not necessarily connected in a meaningful way. Self-explanation, on the other hand, is more like drawing lines between those dots, creating a whole picture or a map. The facts are still there, but they're part of a bigger, more understandable structure. This brings us back to a classic debate in psychology. Is understanding something just about activating related ideas in your brain automatically? Or do you need to actively work at constructing those connections? The results here strongly lean towards active construction. Just having related facts pop into your head isn't the same as building a solid understanding. They emphasize that the real work of understanding happens when you are first learning, when you are noticing what you don't know, trying to fill those gaps with logical guesses, and fitting the new understanding into what you already know. Self-explanation encourages this active building while self-testing because it focuses on retrieving specific answers, doesn't really push you to do that. And the evidence for this is pretty striking. When they looked at the people who self-explained, their later ability to answer inference questions was driven by whether they had actually included those inferences in their own words during the explanation process. It wasn't as much about whether they had just repeated the facts they remembered. So, what does this mean for us? It doesn't mean self-testing is bad. It is still a great tool for strengthening memory for facts. But the paper suggests it is best used as a part of your learning strategy, not the whole thing. It is probably most effective when it comes after you've already had a chance to really grapple with the material, maybe through reading, listening to a lecture, or even discussing it with someone. The concern is that relying only on self-testing, especially with digital flashcards where you might just be drilling answers, could lead to remembering a lot of isolated facts without truly understanding the underlying concepts. This can limit your ability to use that knowledge flexibly in new situations. The core message here is pretty clear. Self-testing is good for memory retention, but it is not enough for developing broad understanding. That requires the active, some assembly-required work of building connections and making inferences. They found that when you just test yourself, you might get good at recalling, but you are not necessarily building a deep, connected understanding. It is like collecting puzzle pieces, but never actually putting the puzzle together. Ultimately, this study is a call for a more balanced approach to learning. We need strategies that not only strengthen memory, but also actively promote the construction of knowledge. Self-explanation appears to be a strong contender for helping us build those connected understandings. So, the next time you are studying, think about not just what you can recall, but what you can connect. Try explaining it in your own words. Look for those underlying relationships. Because true learning, the kind that lasts and allows you to really use what you know, requires more than just drilling facts. It requires some assembly. What do you think about these findings? Does this resonate with your own study habits? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown helpful, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science secrets. Well, see you next time.